looking at becoming a CPA, I'm like, do I really want to do this or not? It's like, well, I'll sit for the exam and I'll see if I pass it or not, and then we'll see. But no, really. I am Michele Heyman. You can tell by my accent that I'm not from Texas. I am from Western New York, and I always say that because if I say New York, people think New York City. Don't have that accent either. But Western New York, Rochester, New York, and that's where I went to college also, to RIT. I did decide to go into accounting in high school, which I think very few people do. We had a CPA come to speak to us in our class, and I thought auditing would be so cool. I'm like, that's what I want to do. I was not a good auditor. I got out, I got my first job in audit. So we were auditing a college. And I got on the financial statement, or the financial aid audit, not the financial statement audit, which is compliance auditing. It's more like internal audit procedures. And so I go in there and they say, we have everything. And I get there and they have it. So I give them the list. They say, we have everything we got there. They did that 4 times. So the next year I'm like, I'm gonna do this better. I am not going back till they have everything. So it's like, are you sure you have everything? Well, no. Okay, well, let me know when you have everything. So they complained to the partner, and that wasn't good. But they were very, very disorganized, and my very best friend, who I just saw this past week, we were both living in Poughkeepsie, New York at the time, and she was hired by the college as a temp employee to just find the records that we needed because their stuff was so disorganized and unfiled that was her only job, is to find what I needed. But both our husbands worked for the same company, so after I wasn't on the audit anymore, I didn't have to worry about independence. We became really good friends. But so I audited up to about 2003 and then decided to go in a different direction. But after graduating, I interviewed with 7 of the big 8 firms, which are now the final 4, big 4. And at the time, they were really the only more global firms. Now, there are so many different size firms because, you know, what they were when I left college is what a regional firm is today. You know, we have regional, national, local. I've worked in local firms anywhere from 3 people to about 150 people, and I think they had 7 locations. Our location wasn't huge, but I was able to, in our college we had cooperative education, which is somewhat similar to your internships. So I worked 2 tax seasons before I even graduated, and that was really interesting because my first tax season I prepared 1985 tax returns. So how many people have taken their tax class know what happened in 1986? So when I moved back the next year, actually it was sort of an advantage because since I didn't know anything, I just had to learn what it was today. My partner, she's 17 years younger than me. She runs the tax side of our practice right now. Probably one of the best tax minds I've ever worked with. She's incredible. I'm so blessed that she's with me. But when she started practicing, we were under the Bush tax law change where we had, it was the beginning of all of the temporary provisions or so much departure from the general rule, but it wasn't a change in the code. It was, we were just having this temporary provision and phase in and phase out and all this stuff, and we didn't have that. When I learned, and actually my graduate paper, or graduating paper, because I only have a BS, I don't have a master's, it wasn't required at the time, was basically on, you know, sort of the process. So it used to be, you know, they present a tax bill, they change the tax code. And now they put tax provisions in all kinds of legislation, and it doesn't go through the same due diligence that a tax law would go through, and they didn't have all these temporary. So she starts practicing, and it's under all these temporary provisions. So when we reverted 10 years later to the general rules, she didn't know what the general rules were and had to relearn those, where I practiced under those. So having the history is very beneficial. But as I went through my career, I worked 10 different firms, different size, all local though, small to medium size local firms, 3 different states. So I moved around quite a bit, and then after being in Texas for quite some time, I finally decided to start my own practice. Prior to that though, I did decide that I wanted to do more than just tax. So I looked around to see what might be interesting. And about the time I was looking at this, we got a call from a client. And the client said, my bookkeeper just came and told me that she stole $3,000. I don't think that's right. I think it's more. And I thought, you know, I'd like to have more training in that. So if we get that call, I don't have to refer it to somebody else. Most of my work, both in valuation and forensic accounting, is from other CPAs that don't do the type of work that I do. Most of the CFEs that have the credential are in government or some sort of internal audit procedures and not out on the street doing the type of work that I do. And so I decided to go into this work, and ironically, one of my first clients that I got when I started my new firm was the same client that made that call. It was her bookkeeper that was stealing, and the theft was between $80,000 and $90,000, and she's still paying that back today. So she didn't have to go to jail. That's another issue. And I am a little distracted today. I was telling Leah, because I've been on a case. I got a call just before tax season ended, and they had a couple employees that they had complaints about. And in the forensic accounting, I do a lot of speaking on fraud prevention and red flags and occupational fraud. And occupational fraud is simply using your position to steal from your employer. And so one thing we always talk about is having a fraud policy. Fraud policy says, this is what fraud is. If you think something's wrong, this is who you talk to. And if you tell us something, this is what we're gonna do. Because so many times people in your organization will know what's going on, but they won't report it. They'll be afraid for their job, they'll be afraid for other things. So they had some people come forward, and they're beating themselves up, but we're like, no, you called really quick, because it's only been, about 18 months or so. I had another client in 18 months, a guy stole $1.3 million. So you can't act too soon. So anyways, they're in the process of terminating the employees right now, and I'm a little apprehensive about what's happening, because we always have to realize that everything we do, no matter what area we go into, we're affecting people's lives. And so we have to, keep that in mind. But anyways, so, getting that call from the client and wanting to be providing more services. When I started getting the training for the CFE, everybody's like, you're not an auditor, why are you doing that? And it's like, I know I'm not an auditor, but it's my small businesses that are hit the hardest. And an average theft in a small business or small organization, which is 100 employees or less, 100 employees can be a pretty good sized company. But still, a lot of times your corporate isn't as big as the number of employees that are in other areas that might not have as much opportunity. But the average fraud is $155,000. And I've only done 2 cases, maybe 3, but I think 2 cases that were under $100,000. So these are not small things. Driving up here, I was sort of, amusing myself, but the only time I've been to Colleen has been on 2 fraud cases. So that's the only work I've done up here. One was an employee theft, and one was partner and shareholder dispute, where you have one person running it, one running the finances, one thinks that the other isn't doing his job, and so they start arguing. So, well, the one up here was even more interesting, because the
the person who was running the operations, it was an absentee owner because there was an age difference between them. And so she was getting paid, I don't know, $300,000 or $400,000 a year, but she didn't think that was enough. So she decided to set up another company, and she was moving all the business into the new company, so she was devaluing the original company, thinking that she could just basically just take it off. And so it didn't work out so good, because they discovered, and it was a really interesting case, because she just put a word in front of the name and did the same font and lettering and everything. So somebody would come in for the one company, they'd sign up, she'd write the first part of the other company's name on top of it and put the client in that company. But that had nothing to do with that company, because that was, her son was running it, she had nothing to do with it. They ran it out of one storefront, so the first company was paying all the expenses, the other one only got income.
That's nice when you can get it.
So that was an interesting case. And of course, we discovered what she was doing. We put the two companies together and valued them, because basically what happens in that type of dispute is if you can prove oppressed shareholder, which the non-operating shareholder was oppressed because she was depriving the value of the company, then the courts will order the buyout of the oppressed shareholder at full market value. So, because typically what happens is you would have a discount to the minority interest. So, anyway, so that was an interesting case. The other one was the only one of the two cases that I had that was under 100,000. It was 90,000, and she committed check fraud, payroll fraud, and credit card fraud. And so, and it was a pretty simple case, because sometimes they're very simple. She was writing checks out to her own name and endorsing the back, so it wasn't really hard to prove. The payroll fraud was a little harder because she was hired for 30 hours, but she worked 48 as far as her paycheck was concerned, so she was getting 8 extra hours plus overtime, 18 extra hours plus overtime on 8 of them a week. And then they're like, well, she's supposed to be here 30, but she's really only here 20. And the other interesting part of that case was that it was discovered by the bank, which I was surprised.
Wow.
And the bank discovered it because they're sort of, have you heard of continuous audit?
Mm-hmm.
So, they had their, continuous audit running in the background, and it spit out that for that size organization in their past history, there was too many transactions going on in their account, and they needed to look at it. And so they kept trying to call. When they finally got to the head person, the individual knew she was discovered, so she abandoned her position, and that's when they find out they're discovered, and if you miss work without an excuse for 3 days, you're automatically terminated. So she was out of there. We came in, helped them clean up and such. They didn't get too much recovery. There's one thing we always look at is, whether they're gonna make an insurance claim or not. A lot of people don't even know they have any insurance for that. They should know their coverage. They should be looking at their coverage. An average just umbrella business policy will cover usually 25 or 50,000, but when most of my cases are average more in the 200 to 250 range, 25,000 doesn't get you very far when that's all the cover you're gonna get. You have no control whether it's a criminal case or not, because that's whether the DA picks it up. And if you want to civilly sue them, you have to pay all the expenses. On the insurance policy, they usually don't pay for my services.
Do you have to testify a lot?
I have not I testified once. I have 2 cases right now that there's a good chance I'm going to be in the hot seat. Because one's very contentious and very large, the dollars are high, so it's gonna be worth it, to do what they need to do, but it's also, it drags out for a really long time. That case started in, I don't know, sometime in 17, and, the individual was served, I think December. They'll have till this December for discovery before we start even getting into deposition and testimony. So most of the time, because they're not gonna pursue it civilly, I don't end up on the hot seat. A lot of people don't do this work because you have to do every case as if you're gonna be sitting in that seat. Which is why I'm a little nervous right now with this person being fired, because they hired him knowing he had a history of suing employers. So they're very concerned about having to terminate this individual, but it's necessary, they do need to do it. He isn't meeting his job requirements. But anyway, so, you know, I've done a lot of different things. I've worked for a lot of different firms. When you're working for a smaller firm, you get the opportunity to do a whole lot more different types of work. You know, even if you're in a tax practice, there's still a lot of other things you do. There's accounting services, and there's more than just tax and audit. And that's what I discovered. And one thing that was really interesting was when I started going for the fraud training, all of a sudden, you know, talking to my business clients when they come in gives me a whole different perspective on listening to what their answers are. Now I see red flags when they're talking. I'm like, oh my gosh, do you realize that just because she's been there 25 years, she's more likely to steal from you than the brand new person? Because after 25 years, and actually when I was in college, I worked for this company. It was an insurance agency, and the very thing was happening. You know, this person started the agency and had an administrative person with him. She grew up with them, and so she was the office manager at the time I was there. You know, but she was really disgruntled because she, you know, is still making, you know, a good wage for somebody who's an office manager, but she sees how much he makes. And it's like, well, I grew this with him. You know, why shouldn't I be making more money? And that attitude of entitlement really caused a lot of people to convince themselves what they're doing is not wrong when they steal. And so you have to be really careful with that. You know, the employee in this situation, in many situations, isn't even thinking about the fact that, you know, that person probably wasn't getting a paycheck when you were. That person took all the risk and put all their personal assets and business assets on the line to bring this company where it's at. You know, why shouldn't they be reaping the rewards and the benefits of it being successful? But the other person, well, I was there all the time with them, you know. So you get the person who asked for the $100 raise and didn't get it, so they took it anyways, and things like that. So we get into a lot of interesting things. But basically, when I started in public accounting, because I've always been in public accounting, I would think, you know, oh, maybe I should leave public accounting and do something else. And then I'd look at it and it's just like weekly close, monthly close, quarterly close. Yeah, I don't think I can do the same thing every week, every month, every quarter, every year. So I don't know. The variety of work in public accounting has always kept me in it. It's what attracted me to it and why I've stayed. Because I switched firms so many times, and a lot of the reasons I moved firms was because we moved. Even in New York, I moved because, you know, if you're living on one side of the river, you move to the other side of the river, you also move your job because it's too hard going back and forth. So there's just a lot of reasons. I left several firms for value differences. You know, I looked at your character map. I think this is awesome. You know, we refer to that as to, you know, an A player in our world. You know, somebody who's a superstar. That person stands out. You're interested in investing in yourself, so will the company. What they say in here as far as the benefits of being that type of employee are 100% true. When I started in public accounting, every time I went into a job, I felt my one job description was that I was to do whatever I needed to do to make my boss's job easier. And I always was successful. I went into accounting because I knew I would always have a job. There are so many different areas, different things that you can do with an accounting background, and even if you decide, well, accounting's not really for me, and you go into business, do you know how many managers don't know how to read financial information? You're miles ahead of your peers, even if you do something that's not directly doing the accounting, but if you know the numbers, you will always be a better person, be a better employee, better equipped to do your job. The other thing is that whenever I would find something, whether it was in the client or even work that I did and made a mistake, the best thing you can do is assess what it is and have a solution when you go and tell your boss or whoever it is you have to talk to, and have an answer. I was working in a firm and I did planning with a client, and I booked depreciation and some other things, and I wasn't doing the tax return, somebody else did the tax return. It came around back to me, and I'm looking at this and I'm like, why is section 179 not on this tax return? Where'd it go? And so, I went back to the preparer and I said, I booked section 179. If it wasn't eligible or something, I need to know, because I don't want to advise a client that we're doing this and it's not right. And so, the person took it and she looked at it and she comes back to me and she goes, yep, you're right. Okay.
All right.
So I'm right.
Now
What are we gonna do about it? That costs a client $13,000 in tax, and you're just gonna tell me I'm right? What are we gonna do about it? How are we gonna handle the client? So I went back, I looked at it. We were able to, luckily the tax situation that the client was in, taking it in the future year wasn't as detrimental, because on that client, we'd already amended the return for another mistake that I found, and I just missed that one the first time around. So I really didn't want to tell the client we had to amend the return again. And when it's our fault, you're eating all that time. And so, make sure that you're, assess this. You might not have the right answer, but if you research it, look at it, have some opinion on it, and then you learn from what the person says. Yes, that might be true, but maybe we're gonna do it this way, or there's this other situation. So, I always find that it's best that, you gotta be upfront. Don't ever try and hide a mistake. It'll be found. It's accounting, we reconcile everything. We find it. So you don't want to do that. So, let's see. So, y'all are gonna come up to start interviewing with firms and such. And, I went to a presentation, the person was talking about the A player, your superstars, and how do you know in an interview when you're talking to somebody that might be one of these people? And one of the key things is that when you go into an interview, you shouldn't be nervous, oh, I'm being interviewed, I'm gonna say the right thing or the wrong thing or whatever. You don't need to stress about it. You should be going in prepared, that you research the company, that there's a reason why you're applying to them and you're interviewing them. If you're interviewing them, you're gonna look like somebody that's interested. Do you want a job or do you want a career? I left a firm because I said, I want a career, and I went to him and I said, I wanna talk to you, about what I can do with this firm. So 18 months and 10 conversations later, and I did not beat around the bush, within 2 weeks, I wanna talk to you and your partners about what I can do in this firm. They never called the meeting. and I left that firm because they wanted me to have a job and I wanted a career. So, one of the things I would always bring up in interviews, but I would ask them about continuing education. Because to me, I want to work for a firm that's interested in me being where I need to be. And I interviewed one firm, I'm like, okay, well, what do y'all do about CPE? I'm a CPA, I need 40 hours a year. Oh, well, you go back to the PPC guide and there's these tests and you just take the tests. So all they wanted was us to make sure that we got our credits in so that we keep our license, but they weren't really interested in what we learned. A PPC guide is a very valuable resource that I've used my entire career. They are books that are put together both from a consulting side and from a practical side as far as preparing tax returns or doing any other services. When basically you could take a PPC guide and walk through any engagement just by going through their processes, checklists, they have everything you need to do the engagement. But just, reading it and filling out multiple choice questions at the back isn't, in my opinion, really good CPE. I like to be able to interact with the people that are actually doing the work. I like, and I know it's a generational thing, but I'm much better in a classroom setting with a real person than I am trying to learn online or just reading and answering questions. Because, I don't know, the interaction is really more beneficial and I remember it better. So that's one of the things that I look for in a firm, but have an idea. So I went to lunch yesterday with one of my staff. She is an accounting student at St. Ed's. She's a biology major for 2 years. Was doing some accounting and realized, ooh, I'm kind of good at this and I kind of like this. So she moved back to Austin, went into the accounting program, and so she called me basically to mentor, and I hired her because she came in, she was prepared. It wasn't an interview, but I was just really impressed with where she was at, the questions she was asking and everything. And she's a natural. She's awesome. We're very happy to have her. She got her BS. She's in the master's program. She went full-time last May. And so I was asking her, it was kind of some of the things I wanted to talk about. And she's like, it's so interesting because a lot of times if you haven't done it, do you really know how to interview a firm? So there's so much out there on the companies these days. When I had to research, we started at the phone book. But, you don't have to do that anymore. You have websites. I remember at one point when I was looking to switch firms, I'm like, okay, I'm not going with anybody that doesn't have a website. Because if they don't have a website, they're not big enough. And I want, to be able to do a lot of different types of work. So, but then if you get too big, like your Final Four or some of your very large regional firms, you could be very myopic in your work. You could be doing one small thing. When I was in New York, I remember we hired a bunch of people that, we were a regional firm, we had 3 locations. And we hired some people out of the Big 8. And we found that they had no idea how to service a small client. They had done one thing on an audit or had done very large tax returns, which some of the issues that they may have known don't even apply to any of the clients we had. So, there are significant differences in the type of work that you're going to do in different size firms. Like I said, when I went into accounting, I went in because I knew I'd always have a job because there's so many different areas. It's more true today. I still think that where I'm at in your earning capacity, starting with the CPA, even before getting all the credentials, because you can have a lot of the credentials I have and a lot of the other ones that are out there without being a CPA. But, when I'm working with clients, there's a big difference between whether they're hiring a CPA or not. and there's definitely, you know, a value difference there. And so, but I would definitely, you know, when you're in your first job, take advantage of the people who are there doing the work. You know, I would find a mentor at almost every firm I've worked for. When you're working in the smaller firms, a lot of times you get to work with the owners. You know, we work directly with all our clients and all of our staff, and we encourage our staff to work with the clients. When I had one of my first jobs that I had, I was doing monthly financial statements, payroll, sales tax, that type of thing. When I was here working for one of the larger firms, the kids coming out of college and the younger CPAs are like, oh, well, we don't want to do bookkeeping. It's like, yeah, but when the client calls you up and asks you about payroll, are you going to know the answer? You know, learning from the ground up is the best way you can advise. Almost at the time? No. And so, you know, take advantage of any type of work that you're given. One of the differences between me and my partner, especially on this last case we just worked, is that her ability to learn and go through new software is so much stronger than mine. And that's a great skill because we come in and, you know, you have industry-specific softwares in almost every area. So anytime you can learn a new software or how to go through it, there's different types of softwares that, you know, even if they're two different industries, you can still figure it out because you have traditional general ledger type accounting softwares, which are in your larger firms. You have your QuickBooks and other types. Oh, Xero's not any good, just so you know. We didn't like QuickBooks, but Xero's here, so now QuickBooks is looking pretty good. But Xero does a lot. They like sponsor everything at the Austin chapter because they're trying to get people to buy into the system, but it has a lot of issues. But anytime learning new software is key because as you learn different ones, learning new ones becomes easier. And so on your tables, I also put some information on the Texas Society of CPAs. From the time I graduated and went into accounting, my mother we actually took Accounting 101 together in the community college when I started. But she became a tax preparer and she eventually became an enrolled agent. And she joined our society and she's like, you know, you need to join the society. And the reason why is because there's nothing more valuable than picking up the phone and calling somebody and having somebody that can help you with a question. You are never alone. There are so many resources you get by knowing people that are doing all kinds of different accounting that you aren't doing, you know, and job opportunities. We were in a board meeting for the Austin chapter of the Texas Society of CPAs, and somebody said, well, you know, the Boy Scouts Council, Central Texas Council, is looking for a controller. She ended up being there, I don't know, more than 15 years. She retired there. It was a great job. So you get those job opportunities. I got several of mine from connections with the Austin chapter. So I did put the application on the desk. You know, I'll pay for anybody who signs up today. Okay, I'm lying. It's free. It's free through May 30th. But even when it's not free, it's only $35 for a student membership. There's a lot of resources. The information I put on the desk gives you information for careers. The presentation is something they send out to say, oh, if you're going to talk to students, talk about this, but I didn't. It gives you a lot of stats on accounting and everything, but I'll tell you, right now, we have a shortage of accountants, we have a shortage of CPAs. I had a friend call me up and he's like, you know, I've worked so long, you know, so many years and everything, we try and not use recruiters because recruiter fees are excessive. Many firms will not pay the recruiter fees. The recruiters will talk to you and they'll be, oh, well, you know, you don't have to pay anything. But the employer pays up to, and sometimes in excess of 25% of your starting salary. So if you do your own work and you look at the firms and you research and you go to them, when I worked for the last large firm I worked for, we were 50 people. And we had two piles, the ones that came from recruiters and the ones that didn't. If we found the qualified person and the one that didn't, that one always got the job, because the recruiting fees are so high. So I encourage you to do your own work and contact the employers. There is no shortage of the ability to find a job with an accounting degree, with your CPA. But having connections with the Texas Society is invaluable. Let's see, did I want to say anything else about them? Oh, well, I have to make sure I put a good plug in, because I'm on the executive committee of the Texas Society, so. I actually never thought I'd be on the executive committee. There's only 2 positions available each year for the entire state, because there's 6 positions that are not named positions, like chair, treasurer, secretary, that type of thing. So just to be on the board. So it was a great honor to get that. It's a 3-year term. There's 6 of us that are not a named position. So 2 people every year go onto the board. But they've been invaluable for my career. The work that we're doing to, there's a book called Race to Relevance, and it's about these membership organizations and, just staying relevant with just the change in generations. And I don't like to get too much into the whole generation thing, because a job's a job. Companies do the best they can. There's different environments for everybody, and everybody likes a different environment. So you just find where you fit and find a company that treats you well. I believe in servant leadership. I don't know if you've studied leadership types or not, but I saw your pyramid here. Servant leadership is an upside down pyramid, because basically, as a leader or any person in the organization, the bottom part's your customers. And, we're there to serve the customer. And anybody below going up to the top management, you're there to serve the people that are beneath or above you in servant leadership to be successful, because that's the only way. If you're only interested in your own success and not the success of the people around you, your organization can't be successful. And so that's the way I like to look at it. So I try my best to give the people in my organization what they need to be able to serve our clients in the best way. And so, any questions? No? So how many people, go ahead.
When you were talking about your experience auditing colleges, I happen to work in the business office down here, and I can tell you, I barely sneeze on a Kleenex without notating why I am doing what I'm doing. I feel like I function every day with just a spotlight right on top of my head and just waiting for an auditor to come. I just pretend like there's somebody on my back the whole time. So that surprised me that they couldn't find, financial aid, that's even more compliancy.
Yeah, well, and it's significant, because if, you don't prove that the financial aid, that the person qualified for the financial aid they were awarded, you have to pay it back to whatever governmental institution gave you that money. And so it was a big deal. And actually, that was my first experience with forensic accounting, because when I was looking through, they had a lot of students that were incarcerated, because there was a program for that. And there was a certain document that every student had to sign. And the same person was signing all of them.
I'm like, all these signatures are the same. We have a problem here. So I reported to the partner. I didn't really hear what happened because I was taken off the audit. But, you know, it's like, basically what was probably happening is they didn't get the paperwork done that they needed to timely, and then the person's no longer available to even sign it, so they probably just signed it. But it makes them ineligible for the financial aid that was given for that. And that's the way they were paid for that program, is basically the financial aid that the incarcerated person would get was pretty much all they got for that program. So it was a big deal if they had to pay it back, because then they had no financial support for educating that student. So how many people do you think that tax and audit are the only choices? Are people looking at other degrees to complement in accounting? How many people want to go for their CPA? Yay!
Maybe tomorrow. Not today.
Well, in New York, when I used to sit, every single part they'd fingerprint you, because that was the proof of who was sitting in the chair taking that exam. My partner sat once for the exam and passed all 4 parts. When we're sitting around talking about the 300 Club, does anybody know about the 300 Club? Okay, so you have 4 parts, you get 75 per part. So the 300 Club is meaning you got 75 on each of the parts and didn't overstudy. So we were talking about that. I wasn't 300, but I was close. But she's like, yeah, they don't give 100 either. I'm like, yeah, go away. Because she had like a 99, a 98, a 96, and a 92.
Time for my son right here.
And she wasn't a top 10, believe it or not. So with the Austin chapter, because we're Austin, and the Texas State Board of Accountancy, who regulates our license, is in Austin. So they have the swearing in ceremony, so when you get your license, you can walk and receive it directly from the state board. I actually did that when I got reciprocity in Texas. I figured since I asked for the packet at least 4 times before I filled it out, that I should at least go. But New York, they sent me a little, certificate, this big, and it just came from the Department of Education, and it was the same they just issued license for everybody, so a CPA didn't, it wasn't a big deal. Okay, you're a CPA. I'm like, okay. I come to Texas, and they're like, oh, Texas. And so when I got it, they're like, you have to go to the swearing in ceremony. So I'm like, okay, so I signed up, and then they sent me this thing, and you can visit with your professors. I'm like, I can be the oldest person there. I don't know if I want to do this. So I went. I wasn't the oldest person there. But it was a lot of fun to go and get it directly from them. So after that, I volunteer every year to be, they do it twice a year, May and November. Yeah, because it's coming up May 25th. May and November, and it's a whole lot of fun. So I usher every single time, because to see the excitement of the students and all the families and everything, it is just a lot of fun and a great end to the accomplishment. And of course, my Texas license is much bigger than my New York, because everything's bigger in Texas. But I was very happy to get reciprocity, because my license is in New York, and when I lived in Florida, I didn't even consider bringing it into Florida, but after being here about 7 years or so, and when I was at that firm, and I'm like, I want a career, not a job, so let me get my license in Texas, and I did that, and then found another job. Because you gotta be appreciated where you're at, right? Right? You gotta enjoy what you do, and I love what I do.
I've worked so many cases, I was sitting there thinking, somebody asked me how many cases, I'm like, I don't know how many cases. But, you know, a lot of the cases, when we do the evidence gathering and they decide what direction they're going, or if the insurance is the only recovery they're gonna get, a lot of times we can go in and we can help them fix things. And that's why I wasn't a good auditor, because auditors can't fix anything. And I hated just going in and, you know, just not being able to do anything. And in tax, you can get in and you can fix things and you can suggest things, and when we come in on these frauds, you don't want it to happen again. And we had one case, the person was stealing, and we wrote up and it's like, you need to fire the business manager because that person's not even doing their job. This person's stealing and this person's not doing anything. And so, you know, they didn't want to listen to us because they don't have to take our recommendations. They can do whatever they want.
They could pay for it.
So about 6 months later, they called and the new person was stealing too. Same way the old person was stealing. You know, and the thing is that, you know, in our current case, the general consensus was that the person was, you know, disorganized and didn't know what they were doing. You leave opportunity. If employees know the management is stealing, they'll steal. You know, they're doing it, we'll do it. Nobody's looking, they'll do it. I had one case, she stole $250,000 and she settled. They actually got full restitution. I think it's my only case of full restitution because the DA was so interested in prosecuting her that the family sold property to buy her out of jail. But she was ACHing money directly from their account into her account, and it was the same account that she filled out her direct deposit for her paycheck.
Smart.
So we knew it was her account.
Like, oh my gosh, the cops are just coming all the time. I couldn't live like that.
Well, and she got caught because there was a new person that was above her, and they had something, so we say there's like some common threads when we see fraud, and one of them is going backwards in the process. So, you know, it goes from this person, this person, this person out the door. It goes this person, this person, this person, she approved it, went back to this person, she added the last line, which was her direct deposit information, and moved money out of accounts that people wouldn't see. And then this person who was new in the position said, you know, let me check that what I approved is what was sent, and when she looked at it, that was it. It was found.
That's how they told you.
But they also had, the accounts she was stealing from were accounts that she was responsible for tracking down the person that account belonged to, but there was no oversight of her finding those people, and so she just liquidated the accounts and then put through that they were dead. When they weren't.
So there's a guy at the University of New Mexico, named is Rich Brody, who, you're laughing like you've heard of him.
No, go ahead. I love other people's stories.
But he does quite a bit of forensic work beyond just his faculty position. He does a lot of expert witness work and so
Oh
forth.
yeah, there's a
And-
lot of faculty.
And he's coined this term, he calls it red collar crime. He said one of the dangers of white collar crime is that the blue collar guy, when he goes in with a gun, holds up a convenience store, you know, send me to jail, I don't care. The white collar guy going to jail is a little more intimidating, so they become a little bit more desperate, and then things get a little bit more dangerous as a result of that. Have you encountered any of that sort of pushback? Let's say pushback.
Elevation in temperature.
Well, we've disengaged a couple of times. So.
That'll be more to the story.
Well,
What does does that mean?
Sometimes you don't have enough insurance.
Wow.
But, no, you know, there's always risk management in everything we do, and we take seriously the cases we take and the cases we don't take. That particular case was gonna be out of Laredo, and we felt that it was probably not a market we should be in. Now, for a short time, and I will say I haven't taken them off the website yet and should, but Billy Petty was working with us, and he was almost 30 years with the Austin Police Department. He was working in the white collar crime unit, so he was effectively working out of the DA's office for the last 10 years of his career, doing the criminal side of fraud. And so he worked for us for a while until one of our clients stole him, which was sad. But it was really good having his perspective on the criminal side, because most of the time, if it does go criminal, then we're out, because the DA's office has to do their own information. On the simple case of the girl that was writing the checks out to herself and endorsing the backs, we may have done that, we may have evidence, but it's not evidence for them in a criminal case. They have to go back to the bank, they have to get it directly from the bank to make the case. On our $250,000 lady that was ACHing her stuff, they actually had sufficient coverage, which is very uncommon, so the insurance was gonna have to pay that $250,000. However, in that type of situation, they won't pay for my services, but because they have their own forensic accountant, they're gonna submit the information to them, and they're gonna say whether the claim gets paid or not. So what I did in that case was, we helped them to package the information for the police report and package the information for the insurance company to make it easy for them to make their determinations. So, and then we actually stepped in as an interim controller to help them fix things and give them the appropriate time to hire somebody, because the risk when we're coming in and they've lost employees is they want to just get somebody in the seat. And it's like, no, you need the right person in the seat and the right kind of skills. And a lot of times when we're coming in, we're finding the accounting department is understaffed. Always. And that was one interesting thing about my current case, was they were telling the person to hire more. I'm like, so he hired one person part-time that didn't know what he was doing. And so that to me is a red flag.
Right.
He was making sure that, well, we have this person doing this little piece and this person doing this little piece and this person over here. Nobody was seeing the whole picture. That to me is a red flag. He was either really friendly, oh yeah, you need that credit card statement, I'll get that to you. When you ask me a month later, I'll tell you the same thing, and you ask me a month later, I'll tell you the same thing. You'd be told twice, actually twice is what we say. If you ask for somebody for information twice and you don't get it, go to the source and get it, because there's a problem. So he was either like that, or he was unapproachable, angry, confrontational. And both of those are red flags. You know, so part of what we reported was, these are the things that we see in fraud cases. But the thing is, when I went in on this case, the first thing I told them is what I tell in all of my presentations: fraud and stupid look the same. Fraud and stupid look the same. And I don't mean to be crude, calling somebody stupid. But the thing is that the person's behavior covering up that they can't do the job, that they're over their head, is the same behavior they're gonna have as if they're covering up stealing, because they're covering up something wrong. So, in this case, so far, he's only stupid, but he is getting fired.
when we go in to clean up and when they hire their new person and clean up, they may find fraud. But part of the problem is the books and records are in such a condition that if it's his job to oversee the finances and the operations of that organization, those books and records wouldn't tell him if anybody's stealing, and that gives people license and opportunity to steal. And so, and I had a daycare, and the girl was in the position 10 years. She did such a great job, she was promoted. And after she was promoted, the assistant director came and said, I found this in her desk. And she was stealing cash. But, you know, the company's policy is we don't accept cash. But of course she was, because she was stealing it. The assistant knew she was accepting cash but never reported it because they had 17 different locations and corporate's over here and all these locations are over here. And there was no fraud policy. There was no, if you think something's wrong, if somebody's not following a company policy, this is who you go to. You go there, this is what we're gonna do. And it's all confidential. So we came in and consulted with them. But the thing is, in a daycare, to prove how much she stole, you would have to go through every month, every child. So the detail of figuring out how much she stole was gonna be significant. Their insurance policy was only $25,000. They also discovered that she had her niece going to this location, and she told her brother, you know, if I pay it, I get an employee discount, so you just pay me. So he paid her. She never paid them. And he had no problem telling him that when he was confronted. So on his testimony, they were able to get the $25,000 from the insurance policy because that's how much it was for that child to attend that facility for the number of years she went there. So they got recovery on that. They didn't continue to investigate the rest, but you know, the main thing we told them is you gotta let your employees know how to report something because they know what's happening. So this is a couple of the other cases we've worked. The one that'll land me in a seat is we have a case where two beneficiaries are trying to remove a trustee from a trust, and that's very difficult to do in the state of Texas. What's your question?
So having the knowledge of where to report to, if it's the boss, the head honcho that is doing the stealing, is there other external sources that they can report it to?
Well, it depends on what they're doing. I mean, if the owner's stealing from themselves, they're stealing from themselves. Their biggest problem is that their employees are probably gonna start stealing from them too. There isn't too much you can do if it's tax fraud, you can always turn them into the IRS, but you're probably out of a job too. There used to be a 10% finder's fee when you turn somebody in. You know, so it's hard when it's the owner, but you know, in a lot of the situations we have, you know, like with the not-for-profit, they need to go to the board. We had one that they had several complaints to the board. They didn't act on it. By the time we came in, we saw that he stole $10,000, but that was all that was left, and the company went under because they didn't take it seriously. That's why the first thing we said to the current client is, you know, we think it's great that, you know, these people were, you know, having concerns and you took them seriously. You know, he may have not been stealing. He still may have. The books and records are a mess. They certainly can't make management decisions. They don't have good financial information. So, and when I was talking about like getting the additional training, when I got the additional training to do the valuation work, it gave me a whole different perspective on seeing the financials. Just like going for
the credential for the forensic accounting gave me a whole different perspective on, you know, the discussions I have with my business clients. And if I think there's concerns, because I had to pick up the phone, call a client and say, when's the last time you looked at your bank statement? Because I think we have a problem with your employee. I was working with her, there was it was actually my, 25 years in doing CPA work. It was my first IRS on-site audit. And so I had to work with her, the employee in this client's office, getting through the audit. Well, after the audit was done, it was a no-change audit. I thought it was great. She was mad. She was so mad because she wanted the IRS to come down on them. She's like, they are taking deductions that are not valid deductions, in her opinion. So she was really upset that they didn't get the book thrown at them or something. And it's like, and then, you know, she had got married, she had a child. All of a sudden she's going through a divorce, and I go into work with her, and all of a sudden she's kind of, it was a gut feeling more than anything else. She's being really careful about what I see, and that's not good. And then she was complaining about her wage. She was mad about the IRS thing, and now she's gonna be a single parent with an infant, and then I made the call. When she wouldn't show me the information I wanted to see, I made the call. And she's like, we look at the bank statement every week, every month. She's not stealing, we know she's not stealing. Like, okay. 2 days before I was supposed to go in and work with her to do year-end planning, she quit. And after she quit, we found out that she wasn't stealing, but she also didn't do her job. She hadn't reconciled the bank accounts in 10 months. She spent all her time emailing with the soon-to-be ex-husband all the complaints and all the problems, and just long emails and all this stuff. She wasn't doing her job. She effectively stole a paycheck. But anyways.
Do you offer any internships?
We have had interns, and we've had success with them, so yes, we do.
My question is, with the position in the field that you're in, did you do a lot of critical thinking courses or classes, or is everything based upon like your intuition and judgment call and experience? Because it's a lot of, I know it's all about character, and you can pick up, if someone's a thief, you know, you can pick those up when you're, I would say, innocent or not in that activity. So you kind of see the red flags sooner, but do you suggest doing a lot of critical thinking courses, or?
I don't know necessarily that I did critical thinking. You know, I did several training courses, because the valuation credential is, they do valuation and forensic accounting in addition to the ACF, who is forensic accounting, and the fraud investigation. So, you know, sometimes it's an investigation because you can only go in on a company when you have predication, and that means you have some reason to believe that something is happening. Either somebody's doing something or something's happening and you don't know who it is. So we only go in when there's predication. If the person's already abandoned the position, it's more just evidence gathering and not necessarily a fraud investigation because we already know what happened. So anyways, I hear my time is up. You guys are great. Good luck in your careers. If I can help you at all, my contact information is on the TSCPA stuff. If you want to become a member, you can send it to me. Well, it's on the back of this, but I also can give you a card.
Yeah, there's a link.
Oh, and social media doesn't apply to me, that applies to TSCPA. Because I do have a website. A lot of people come to me because of my website, I don't know why. But social media is not necessarily my thing.
Mine either, but I'm desperately trying.
All right. Well, thank you for coming.